They are one of the largest asset management firms in the world, controlling about $7.7 trillion in global assets under management and advising over 30 million individual investors worldwide. Whilst they trail ever so slightly behind their main competitor BlackRock, both firms share many similarities in terms of their influence over the world, whether it's their ability to manipulate the economy using their vast pools of investor capital, or in pushing whatever evil political agenda that they desire into the corporate world and beyond. They are one of the big three index fund managers. They are Vanguard, and they rule the world alongside BlackRock to all of our dismay. Now, Vanguard are actually the largest provider of mutual funds and the second largest provider of ETFs or exchange-traded funds in the world. Anytime they enter a new market, competitors see their margin demolished and outflows skyrocket in a sequence known as the Vanguard effect. This effect takes note of their ability to influence other funds to lower their fees in order to better compete, something which has already cost Vanguard's opponents $200 billion in active fund fees over recent years. On top of this, Vanguard has saved its own investors over $175 billion in management fees and $140 billion in trading cost savings since its founding 50 years ago. All in all, Vanguard has forced costs lower across the entire industry to the tune where they've cost their competitors over $1.3 trillion in lost revenue over their lifetime, so there should be no real questions as to how Vanguard has become so powerful. They have undercut their competitors and therefore become one of the favorite pets of the ruling elite alongside BlackRock, fueling their growth and influence over the rest of the corporate world. After all, the company is a mutual, meaning that those with large holdings in Vanguard have huge swathes of ownership over the company and the direction it takes. What they say goes, and when they make a move, the world follows. If they want to influence the corporate world and therefore all the companies under its control, all they have to do is implement it within their own firm and watch as the rest of the world complies. Now, you've likely heard things like this before, that some corporation has huge levels of control over everything and there's nothing you can do about it, and you've likely also heard countless mainstream puppets rush to the defense of BlackRock and their cabal and any other corporations to explain why this is all nothing more than a bunch of conspiracy theories. But I'm here today to explain exactly what actually goes on and set the record straight. After all, it is true that Vanguard hold ridiculous degrees of power and they are not afraid to use it. So do Vanguard actually own the world? Well, no. They are listed as massive shareholders on every single publicly traded firm you can find, yes, but they don't actually own those shares, they simply custody them for their customers. That means instead of you having to hold onto the shares yourself, you can just use Vanguard instead, and their easy to use software and interface, and it's much easier all around. But here's where things get sinister, because for all intents and purposes, Vanguard pretend that they own these shares. When they custody your shares for you, Vanguard get to use your voting rights whenever or wherever they want. That means if they want ESG and you don't, well, Vanguard will vote against your wishes and in a way that benefits them no matter what. And it doesn't just end there either, because Vanguard can even use the threat of voting with these shares when they control 15% of all voting rights of a massive $100 billion company. They are only ever a single phone call away from the men making the final calls. So if something that they don't like happens, it's incredibly easy for them to bring up the C-suite executives and tell them how it's actually going to go. And again, when you have 15% of voting rights, you can destroy a company's ability to make its own decisions, as the vast majority of shares never actually exercise their votes. That means that Vanguard can often exercise an outright majority when it comes to voting decisions, and even if they can't, all they need to do is sway one or two investors to their side and they get what they want. And in this sense, many a time has a random investor received unlimited access to private jets, private yachts, and big duffel bags with cash, with their sudden change of heart in voting intention becoming apparent immediately afterwards. And even then, there's more, as if all that wasn't enough on its own, because this influence is always strong enough to force board members onto these companies that they control, that are of course decided by Vanguard themselves. So then they literally have men on the inside deciding what is done with a company that Vanguard doesn't actually own a single share in. Frankly, they ought to have literally no ability to influence these companies at all, but they instead hold all the power and essentially dictate the corporate cabal that exists today along with BlackRock. And that is the sad truth about investing into big companies these days. So often they are not there to generate value for their shareholders as they claim, but instead to generate value from these evil corporate giants like Vanguard and BlackRock. But you know what hasn't been manipulated or captured by the elite, and in fact never could be? Gold. So with everything going on, it really shouldn't be surprising that millions of individuals are wondering whether they should be investing into gold, and that's where this video's sponsor Vaulted comes in. Vaulted is the best way for investors to acquire physical gold with a great website and mobile app that makes it easier than it's ever been. They store and insure their one-to-one allocated gold in the Royal Canadian Mint, and you can rest easy in the knowledge that you can request instant physical delivery of your gold holdings whenever or wherever you desire. Their prices are the best in the market because they store all of their gold at the manufacturer and they cut out all unnecessary middlemen. They don't charge any premium or spread when buying or selling you gold, and they are as transparent as possible, meaning there are absolutely no hidden fees. I highly suggest you check Vaulted out. There's a link for you all down below in the comments and the description. Again, that's Vaulted with the link down below in the comments and the description, and you can help support the channel too. But just why has Vanguard been able to grow so fast? Since the financial crisis, no other firm has been able to grow at such a fast pace. Vanguard has attracted an additional $6.7 trillion in assets since 2009, when Vanguard had just $1 trillion in assets under management, marking an increase of over 770% since then. Even BlackRock has not been able to keep up with that, having increased by 257% during the same time period, or about 1/3 as much. Assuming these current growth rates hold, Vanguard will pass BlackRock in size within this current decade. Still, not all is well for Vanguard, who are suffering from a multitude of issues, all of which are public and suggest Vanguard is not as stable as they want us to believe. As recently as May 16, 2023, this hugely successful patent class, which allowed clients to pull in more than $100 billion worth of additional investment gains, expired. That means that finally, after 20 years, rival fund managers became free to replicate Vanguard's unique fund structure without permission from Vanguard. But more importantly, Vanguard has actually evolved into a target because of their control freak practices. We can see the firm is facing a two-fronted attack on their ESG policy as the entire world wakes up to how much of a scam this entire thing is, and as those who push this agenda attack the Vanguard for not going far enough. As Morningstar found, Vanguard supported only 28% of key ESG resolutions, less than half of its two closest rivals, BlackRock and State Street, and even worse for Vanguard, the policies that they're voting against were often resolutions on civil rights and racial equity, as well as environmental-related, meaning that Vanguard has royally annoyed the left and is now sitting within their crosshairs after previously being the darling love child of them. As I like to say, they sowed the wind and now they will reap the whirlwind. In terms of financial involvement today, Vanguard still holds at least $86 billion in coal, making them the world's #1 investor in the industry. They still hold well over $10 billion in equity for oil companies that are currently working to destroy the Amazon rainforest alone, and that's ignoring all of the fossil fuel equity they own everywhere else, which runs into the hundreds of billions. It has suddenly become clear to those who used to support ESG that it was never about the environment at all. So those who care deeply about this issue are now staunch Vanguard opponents. And at the same time, Vanguard has also been heavily targeted by the anti-ESG movement in the US and around the world. When it became clear that ESG was all a scam, some got angry that it wasn't about improving the world and saving the environment, but the rest of us, we got angry about the fact that ESG was being used to control us all, that it made energy more expensive for millions of people for no reason, and that it was really just a massive money grab coming from the biggest corporations in the world, like Vanguard, and blessed by the corrupt politicians that had been bought off. And to top it all off, some lawyers and politicians have now realized that actually these supposed efforts to combat climate change were actually illegal and violated American antitrust laws. So not only was all of this immoral, it was illegal as well. Vanguard are getting hit from both sides of the establishment and from everyone on the ground floor now. There are countless other journalists like myself publishing the truth about Vanguard, and we can't be bought off unlike these corrupt politicians. To top it all off, Vanguard cannot continue to sit on the fence. They will have to pick a side, and whatever way they go, they will suffer with a proposition, they will suffer with a proportion of their client base likely to be withdrawn, in a similar scenario to how BlackRock had it when $3 billion was pulled from their funds by Republican state treasurers over their compliance with ESG. Long may these losses continue for Vanguard. After all, it would only be an act of karma after their tax avoidance and ridiculously uncompetitive practices they've been using to fuel their growth. And if you want to invest into gold and not companies controlled by Vanguard, then click this link here. Or if you just want to watch another video, then click this link here.